Welcome to tonight's Public Insights lecture. My name is Sally Shorthall. I co-chair the Public Insights Committee. Tonight's lecture is by Dr Carmen Hubbard and it's titled Brexit and Agriculture, What Next for British Farmers? I'll be back after the lecture for a live question and answer session with Carmen. If you would like to ask a question, you can do it by using the drop-down box function in YouTube, or you can tweet us at InsightsNCL. We're always keen to get feedback, so if you like, you can fill out our survey. You'll see the link below the video. So as well as chairing tonight's event, I also have the privilege of introducing Carmen Hubbard to you. Carmen and I work together in the Centre for Rural Economy in Newcastle University. Carmen is a highly respected agricultural economist. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the Academy of Economic Studies in Bucharest, and she holds a PhD in agricultural economics from Aberdeen. Carmen was one of a few experts who commented on the final drafting of the European Union's Cork Rural Development Declaration. She is a member of DEFRA's Animal Welfare Committee, and until recently, she served on the executive board of the Agricultural Economic Society. Carmen just recently won a really prestigious Economic and Social Research Council Award to do research on Brexit and agriculture in the 4 regions of the UK, and she'll be drawing on that research tonight. Carmen is internationally recognised and has a wide network of colleagues in Penn State and Cornell in the US to Brazil, Vietnam and Japan. As well as being a top-notch scholar, Carmen's a really nice colleague. She's a great person to work with. She is an elected representative on the university's Senate, which is the governing and executive body of the university. She's a great cook. She likes opera. She's very generous with her time and with her possessions. She does a great line in shoes, but I've stopped admiring them because I've been gifted a pair once too often. Carmen is really passionate about her research, and I think that will really come across in the lecture she's about to give you now on Brexit and agriculture, what next for British farmers. Do bear in mind that as she's giving the lecture, when she talks about the CAP, she's referring to the EU Common Agricultural Policy. So enjoy the lecture, and I'll see you afterwards for the Q&A.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Sally, for the introduction. I would also like to say thank you to the university for giving me the opportunity to share with you my thoughts on what's next for British farming post-Brexit. For most of us, agriculture is not a very exciting topic, and the sector attracts attention only when things go wrong, where the press makes a fuss about specific issues such as bad farming practices, supply shortages, high food prices, or exceptional events like the mad cow disease, foot and mouth, and more recently, Brexit. The Brexit referendum campaigns played up the cost of EU membership with hardly any debate on the subsidy received by the British farmers through the Common Agriculture Policy, here as CAP. And more importantly, there was hardly any discussion about the potential implications that the agri-food sector would encounter following exit from the EU single market and the customs union. This lecture has been inspired by recent research led by Newcastle University, which estimated potential economic impacts of Brexit on UK farming. Our research highlighted differences in Brexit impact at both farm and sector levels, but also across the 4 nations, implying that although the UK-British agricultural industry can potentially adapt and survive, the required adjustments will likely create considerable hardship for individuals, families, and businesses. In this talk, I would like to concentrate on 2 points. First, on how the CAP has shaped UK agriculture over the past half century, and second, some of the key challenges that British farmers are facing following Brexit. And I also pose a rhetorical question. Will Brexit be a blessing or a curse? So, how has the CAP shaped our farming sector? Launched in 1962, the CAP had some very clear aims: to support an increase of food production, to stabilize markets, to ensure food security, to secure a fair standard of living for farmers, and also to ensure reasonable prices for food consumers. These objectives were to be achieved through a set of policy measures, particularly in the form of market support, such as, for example, price support for certain products, such as milk, cereals, beef, and oilseeds, through storage and withdrawals of surplus products when prices were considered too low, and also through export subsidies. Initially, most of the community's budget was allocated to agriculture, with about 80% going to this sector. But so both consumers and taxpayers contributing to farmers' support. However, by the late 1960s, there was pressure to reduce CAP expenditure. But the plan proposed by the Agricultural Commissioner, Sico Mansholt, here in this picture, Mansholt was a Dutch farmer, but also a politician. So the plan which he proposed and which would have resulted in some 5 million farmers leaving the sector was rejected. So the community continued pumping in money from the public purse to support its agriculture. But economics teaches us that market intervention, particularly price support and import taxes, can lead to overproduction. And this is what had happened. So by the 1980s, expressions such as food mountains and lakes of milk and wine became well embedded in our vocabulary. Societal concern regarding food safety, environmental damage, declining farmer standard of living as real farm income dropped, but also conflicts between member states added to the criticism of the CAP. Moreover, international opponents of the policy argue that because of its protectionist and trade distorting stance, the CAP was detrimental toward prices, affecting millions of farmers around the world. So there was a desperate need for reform. But despite an urgent need for reform, powerful farming lobbies from the main beneficiaries of the CAP, like France and Ireland, for example, stopped that happening. And in my next slide, I would like to share with you some pictures, and I would like to point to the one on the left, which is an amazing photo published by The Observer in 1992, and who has been provided to me by a colleague. And in this photo, you could see all of apples 500 meters long, 20 meters wide, and 3 meters high, which was worth at the time about 94 million pounds. My colleague, who did some research on the subject at the time, also argued that many of these apples would have never reached the market because prices would then fall to such a low level that the cost of harvest would exceed the price. So going back to my point about the need for the CAP change, when it did happen in a series of reform initiatives from 1992 onwards, most commentators argue that the reforms were not radical enough. At the same time, the community faced mounting international pressure to accommodate agricultural trade reforms, and the community also needed to think about further expansion. For example, the 1992 reform, the so-called McSharry reform, introduced direct payments to farmers to compensate them for cuts in farm prices. This was supposed to be a transitional measure, but once direct payments were in place, they were here to stay. Agenda 2000 and the midterm review of 2003 reforms had to prepare and provide a framework for the accommodation of the Central and Eastern European countries. Following a continuation of societal concerns regarding the environment, in 2013, politicians in Brussels decided to green the CAP, so to make farming more sustainable and also to justify their use, the use of taxpayers' money. So 30% of the direct payments were to be used to deliver environmental benefits based on 3 criteria: crop rotation, maintaining permanent grassland, and ecological focus areas. And here with a quote from the vision of the then agricultural commissioner, Dacian Cioloș. And his argument was that the CAP needed a new direction, which was supposed to take better into account society expectation. And he also argued that there was a need for making direct payments fairer and greener, but also to strengthen the position of farmers within the food production chain, but also to make the CAP more efficient and more transparent so that overall the CAP could play a key part in achieving the overall objective of promoting smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth for the entire European Union. Each reform built on the previous one and also added something new. For example, payments for withdrawing land from production, this was the so-called set-aside, but also establishing rural development as an aim in itself. Rural development included also payments for agri-environment, payments for farms located up in the hills or mountains or in remote areas. These are the so-called less favored area payments. But also payments for farmers to leave the sector via early retirement. The difference between direct payments and the rural development payments was that the latter were co-financed from the national budget. I do hope that by now we've all got used with Chris Whitty's slides, because I have a few as well. So my next slide shows us the CAP reform path between 1980 and 2019. And as shown in this graph, market support provided through price, here highlighted in yellow, was gradually replaced with producer support through income or the so-called direct payments. The latter became the largest component of the CAP budget, as illustrated by the blue and the green colors. While the blue bars show payments linked directly to the level of production, the green bars show support linked to land, but this was and still is subject to compliance with a set of basic rules regarding land management, environmental protection, animal welfare, and food safety. Some scholars argue that although the reforms were welcome, as they led to a significant decline in CAP spending, this was down to less than 40% of the EU budget, and as you could see in this graph, it accounted for less than 0.4% of the EU gross domestic product in 2019. There was, however, little change in the distribution of CAP benefits, with most of the money actually going to large landowners. Funding for rural development was also modest, and the EU continued and still continues to protect its borders through high import tariffs. The UK joined the community at a time when CAP subsidies were in full swing. This was in 1973. And at the time of accession, British farmers also received subsidies from the UK government, mainly in the form of deficiency payments. And these were distributed in accordance with the 1947 Agriculture Act. But the British public regarded CAP adoption with skepticism, and this was mainly due to worries regarding an increase in food prices, which of course took place once the country acceded to the community. But the UK's accession also coincided with a spike in old commodity prices, leading to a farm bonanza. Some academics claim that this led to an over-intensification and capitalization of the industry, which can still be seen in today's agriculture. And a referendum on the continuation of EU membership, which took place in 1975, had a positive outcome. And here with an interesting quote from Margaret Thatcher, published in Financial Times on June the 12th, 1975, and please allow me to quote. "In the modern world, it is worth distinguishing between the substance and symbols of sovereignty. The substance is the freedom to act independently, something that is now seldom possible for any single country." End of quote. I let you to compare this quote with what happened in 2016. So, all CAP reforms were fully supported by UK governments, which have been highly critical of the CAP since joining the community. But there are those who argue that the CAP became less common over time, and the UK's coronation did not always make use of the increasing flexibility afforded to them to pursue best value for money. So demonstrating the strength of the farming lobby in influencing policy decisions made by the agriculture departments. However, each reform shaped the UK farming sector. Like all EU members, British farmers benefited from various types of subsidies. So all those which I show you in my previous graph. There have also been some structural changes in the sector. Farmers have become larger and more farms, not farmers. Farms have become larger and more specialized, but how much is down to the CAP still remains debatable. Some will argue that actually the CAP slowed down this process, and without direct payments, the farming sector would have looked different. This indeed may be the case, but research shows that the small subsistence farms in Central and Eastern Europe, and which are not eligible for any CAP payments, did not disappear following EU accession. There is also a strong argument that, as within other EU member states, the CAP has made British farmers heavily dependent on direct payments. And this is why I want to show you this graph, and I did press the button much quicker than I should. But anyway, I'm coming to the point and I'm explaining this graph. Between 2005 and 2019, UK farmers received some 40 billion pounds, this is in nominal terms, in the form of direct payments, with annual payments accounting on average for about 2.6 billion per year. A further 0.8 billion pounds per year was spent under the CAP for environmental conservation and rural development. These payments together formed 90% of the UK's financial benefit of EU membership, and which I said was hardly debated during the Brexit referendum campaigns. So finally, this slide shows that 61% of the average farm business income comes from direct payments. And if we look in particular at the beef and sheep farms, here on the graph labeled as LFA grazing livestock and lowland grazing livestock, they are almost totally reliant on these payments, with over 90% of their income depending on direct payments. But mixed farms are totally reliant on direct payments. This contrasts with sectors such as pig, poultry, and horticulture, which receive far less support and which rely very little on direct payments. But not all farmers benefited equally. And this is shown in the next graph. So both graphs were provided by the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So in this graph, we can see that out of the 85,000 farms in England that are eligible for direct payments, you need to have at least 5 hectares to be eligible for direct payments. So out of these 85,000 farms which received about 1.7 billion pounds in 2016, almost half of this went to the top 10% of farms, while the bottom 20% received less than 2%. I've also looked myself at some of the official figures regarding the main beneficiary of the CAP for 2018 and 2019, but and I will give you the figures only for 2019. So the official figures for 2019 show 2 recipients that stands out within the top 10%, and these are beeswax Dyson. This is Dyson as in the vacuum cleaner, which received about £3 million, and the National Trust Farms, which overall received £2.7 million. On top of this, they receive about £800,000 and £6 million, respectively, for rural development. So, where we are and what's next? On Christmas Eve last year, the UK and EU finally signed a trade and cooperation agreement. So officially, from 1st of January 2021, we left the EU single market and the customs union. Leaving the EU also means leaving the CAP. This implies that Westminster and the devolved governments have had to design and implement their own agriculture policy. Agriculture is a devolved policy. So public consultation took place across all the 4 countries in the UK, and this led to different preferences being expressed. For example, the complete and rapid elimination of direct payments have been treated with more caution in both Scotland and Northern Ireland, as opposed to England and Wales. A new Agriculture Act became law in November 2020, but the Act, it focuses mainly on England, with just one part dedicated to Wales and Northern Ireland. Scotland published its own agriculture bill in November 2019, which allows it to continue CAP measures, including direct payments, beyond 2020. The Agriculture Act of 2020 has been hailed by various former DEFRA secretaries of state as, and I quote, once in a lifetime opportunity, a landmark, and one of the most important environmental reforms for many years, which will take the UK away from the EU's bureaucratic common agriculture policy. Or quoting the current Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, George Eustice, we want to remove the old style top-down rules and draconian penalties of the EU era, end of quote. The Act stipulates a gradual phasing out of CAP direct payments by 2027. This will be replaced with a system that rewards farmers for the provision of public goods, such as improved soil health, better quality air and water, public access to the countryside, animal welfare, and flood risk reduction. At the core of its delivery is the so-called Environmental Land Management Scheme, described by DEFRA as one flexible contract that will allow farmers to deliver what the public wants alongside food and fiber. The Act also sets out measures to increase farm productivity and fairness along the supply chain, and includes provision regarding market intervention and assistance during exceptional market conditions, but also compliance with the old trade organization rules. To allow farmers to adjust, the Act established a 7-year transition period starting from this year, from 2021. The government has also to report to Parliament on UK food security at least once every 5 years. Our research at Newcastle highlights that EU exit, particularly the elimination of CAP direct payments, is likely to have a significant effect on both farm profitability and farm viability. Our results show that uplands beef and sheep farms will be particularly affected, and many of these farms will struggle to survive. However, our results also show that the effects will be far from uniform, and the impact and the magnitude of the impact varies by farm time and size, and also by country. I mean, by the 4 nations. So, for example, and I want to show you my next Chris Whitty's graph. For example, our estimates show that under the UK-EU free trade agreement, without direct payments, some 60% of grazing livestock farms in less favored areas will not make any money, as compared to only 15% if UK would still be a EU member. Our results also show that Scottish farmers will be affected the most. And of course, this explains the differences in the geography of the countries. Our findings are in line with those of National Farmers Union that estimates the reduction of direct payments by 2024 will hit the sector very hard, with farmers losing between 60% to 80% of their income. Whereas farm viability could be sustained through increased off-farm income, for example, income from a job in a local factory or pension, it is equally true that it could be sustained through alternative policy support. However, so far, the environmental land management scheme provides very little detail regarding how the support will look, and who exactly will benefit also remains unclear. Traditionally, economists have categorized farmers as price takers in the market, and that is because they have little market power, and therefore they are unable, unlike, for example, supermarkets, to set their selling prices. The farming minister, George Eustice, wants farmers to become price makers and to increase their power in the market. But this is easier said than done. And this is not something new, because previous ministers have been advocating this also for decades. There are some way of sorting out this, but this is not a simple answer. For example, grouping together to form cooperative is one possibility, but these have never been popular in the UK. Another possibility is for farmers to add value to a product, for example, by transforming milk into specialty cheese, or switching to organic production. But some farmers are already doing this. But farmers who produce an undifferentiated product or a homogeneous product as potatoes, carrots, wheat, milk are always likely to be price takers. Moreover, any form of support is likely to be capitalized into land values, as well as captured by others across the supply chain, as it has happened with the CAP. And indeed, this was one of the main criticisms brought to CAP by various scholars. So the tenant farmer simply pays more in rent. It remains to be seen how this might manifest itself under the new regime. Policy differences between the 4 nations may also lead to tension about fairness and market competition across the UK's internal market. And there are other factors which I don't have time to cover here, but which are equally important, such as, for example, the movement of the pound on foreign exchange markets and seasonal workers. What we know is that the government just scrapped the Pick for Britain scheme that encouraged British people to support the fruits and vegetable harvesting last year. We also know that the Brexit deal with the EU has created so far a lot of frustration for businesses, as exporting and importing have been hindered and the red tape has increased tremendously, creating havoc at the borders. In January, the press reported almost daily about miles of trucks stuck and perishable food rotting. And just a few days ago, the BBC reported that the farming and food community, particularly from Scotland, is mounting pressure to reopen on the government to reopen the Brexit deal. And so it also calls for compensation for firms affected by trade disruption. The BBC report also highlights the concern of MPs at Westminster regarding the food sector and the lack of a level playing field on food trade. Liz Truss, the International Trade Secretary of State, is also very keen to sign as many trade deals as possible and as quickly as possible. And we know that the UK-Japan deal has been heralded as a great triumph. And negotiations with Australia are already taking place and are expected to be signed in June. Negotiation with New Zealand and US, and of course with other countries, will follow. All these countries will ask for more access to the UK markets. And of course, this makes the National Farmers Union very anxious, calling for the government to ensure that British farmers will not lose out on food and animal welfare standards. But like with any negotiation, each side will want the best deal for itself. So compromise is needed. But the love affair of UK governments with free trade goes back as far as the repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846. And I want to share with you this, this quote of Edith Wetham from the Agriculture History Review in 1974, who in her article, The Agriculture Act 1920 and its repeal, The Great Betrayal, captures brilliantly the relationship of UK governments with free trade. And please allow me to quote, because I think this is an excellent way of showing this relationship. And I quote, "During the 70 years which followed the repeal of the Corn Laws, the national policy for British agriculture was limited to paying farmers for the food and raw materials they produced. Prices determined by competition in markets increasingly dominated by overseas produce. This policy was considered so fundamental to the welfare of the country that when grain and meat prices fell sharply in the last quarter of the 19th century, and successive governments showed real concern over the agriculture depression, protection by way of tariffs was never contemplated for any of the basic foods. At any time up to 1916, there was strong opposition to any policy which provided support for British farmers by raising the prices of imported grain, meat, or dairy produce." I let you, the audience, to judge this quote. So, to conclude, both Brexit and COVID pandemic have added great pressure to our farming sector. But as with previous economic and health crises, such as mad cow disease and foot and mouth, British farmers have proved to be resilient and we have seen farm businesses adapting and adjusting their activities. But as with any significant policy changes, there will always be winners and losers. So there will be farmers who will leave the UK British industry, but also there might be others who will join. So will Brexit be a blessing or a curse? Only time will tell. Thank you.
Carmen, thank you for a fantastic lecture. It was so interesting, and I could just hog all of the time myself to talk to you about it. But as chair, I'm going to have to introduce some of our questions. So the first question I'm going to put to you comes from our mutual friend, Anne. And she asks, as rewilding seems to be the current buzzword, even on the Archers, do you think that this could be good or bad news for farmers in a post-Brexit world, or is it just a fad?
I think it depends very much on the farmer. So for some farmers, could be bad news if the farmers want to farm. For some, probably no. But is it here to stay? I think yes, because this is what the new direction is. And if we look at the path to sustainable farming, and the speech which George Eustice presented some time ago, just recently, it's clear that there will be subsidies who will support farmers to do something else, hopefully beyond the production of food and fiber.
Great, thank you. Mark asks, in today's global market, where we import huge amounts of our food, would a reduction in our farming industry really have such a big impact?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I should have said thank you to Anne and thank you to Mark and to everybody who is posting their questions. I don't think that the reduction of our farming industry will have such a big impact. Depends on how do you define impact and impact to whom. The UK has imported food for many years. And if Mark, you are trying to touch on the question of self-sufficiency, then you probably know that we are self-sufficient about 64% of our food is produced within the UK, sorry. However, there are sectors like, for example, fruits and vegetables where we do not produce a lot. If you're if your topic is about food security, then that's a very different story. I know people are using food security interchangeable with self-sufficiency, which is not the case. UK has not been yet at any threat from a food security point of view, because we imported food from countries which they were economic and political stable. And as you probably listened to my last slide, where I quote Edith Wetham, it was very clear that successive UK governments were very much interested in the promotion of a food chip policy. So I don't think that it might be a disaster. But if we want to increase self-sufficiency, yes, probably we can. Depends, of course, but this will depend very much on what we want next, and this will come at a cost. So if we want to produce avocado, if we want to produce bananas, if we want to produce any fancy thing in this country, yes, of course we can, but there will be a cost which will be associated with the production of that particular product.
So that sort of leads nicely into Elizabeth's question. She asks, in terms of sustainability of livelihoods, what are the implications going to be for the lowest income groups? I presume what she means there.
I don't know what they mean as sustainability of livelihoods for farmers. If it's related to farmers, we do, with colleagues at Newcastle, we just published a very interesting paper regarding the viability and the sustainability of farms. I would think, and sorry, maybe I should rephrase a little bit. What I'm trying to say that a farm is viable as long as, you know, it gets some income from farming. But farmers are not depending only on that income. Farmers also have income from various other sources, including of farm income. As long as a farm does not have any money, it doesn't make any money from farming and doesn't have money from any other sources, in this case, you will argue that indeed that a farm will be very vulnerable. So the sustainability of that livelihood will be questioned. I hope I answered the.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting and a really interesting point. And I spoke to a farm business consultant recently who would say that actually farms are losing money, but being supplemented by diversification businesses or partners of farm income. So I think that's interesting. But Carmen, I'm also just going to ask you, in case Elizabeth was asking about the implications for lowest income levels in terms of food prices increasing, I wonder if you would comment on that.
If it's related to, yes, if it's related to food consumers and those which spend a lot of their money on food from their disposable income, indeed, any increase in food prices will affect these people. Okay. Yes.
Bert asks an interesting question. What do you think would have happened if CAP had never been implemented and food or farming were controlled by market forces?
I assume, thank you, Bert, I assume this is for the UK as a whole, because, you know, CAP was decided to be adopted, but for the UK, going back to what I was talking about in my lecture, and I pointed out that the time of accession, British farmers received deficiency payments. So these were paid for farmers when the so-called the minimum guaranteed price, you know, went below the market prices. So it covered that difference. I would think that probably the UK government may have to continue with deficiency payments, but if I remember well, there has been some research which I think argue that this policy was becoming expensive at the time. So it could have been that the UK government would have continued with deficiency payment, maybe for a while, but could have get rid of that and even could, you know, move towards different instruments similar to the Common Agriculture Policy. And we can see this happening in other countries. If you look, for example, in South Korea or in other countries, people are starting look at the UK and they are trying to adapt their measures closer or similar to what is going on in the European Union.
That's great, thank you. Julia asks, is the reason pig and poultry farmers get by on so little direct payments because they benefit from the subsidies to grain farmers that keep feed prices low?
Oh, that's interesting. So is the reason, can you just say that again?
So pig and poultry farmers get by with very little direct payments.
It's true.
Julia's asking, is the reason for this because feed prices are low, and the reason they're low is because the subsidies go to grain farmers, and then that benefits the pig and poultry farmers. So they kind of get subsidized in a weird...
No, not at all. Think about a subsidy on a grain farm will actually mean higher prices for those who are for the pig and poultry farms. No. So think about subsidies. Anything any form of subsidy will be capitalized by somebody else, even in the land, if it's, the landowners or somebody else in the supply chain. No, I don't think that's the reason, Julia.
Is it that the pig and poultry farmers are so intensive?
Depends on how do we define intensive. Depends on how do you define intensive. It's true that in this country, we just like to eat a lot of white meat. I know pig is not necessarily white meat, poultry it is. And yes, probably you can argue they are intensive, but they are pretty integrated and they have a very different structure. Yeah.
Keith asks,
I don't like to use intensive because sorry, Sally, just to say, I don't like to use intensive as a word. And that is because working with farmers across the UK, they don't like the word intensive. And we associate all the time intensive with things which are bad, which is not necessarily the case. And probably that's what I try to, to be, let's say, more supportive of farmers. Although that some people who did argue that indeed pig and poultry farmers probably are intensive, but as I said, depends on how you define them.
Keith asks, will the upland grazing of Northumberland be replaced by forestry?
Thank you, Keith. I don't really know if they will be totally replaced by forestry. We do know that there is the tendency to support to reforest. So there is a lot of money which are in the pipeline, to support the plantation of lots of trees. So I don't know if the entire Northumberland will be replaced by forestry. It might.
So Jose asks, can you say something about the idea that the CAP killed the countryside in relation to Graham Harvey's book, The Killing of the Countryside? What is your position on that?
Oh, thank you, Jose or Jose. He says something about the CAP killed the countryside.
You could almost say the opposite, couldn't you?
No, that is true. But has CAP killed the countryside? We can argue that the CAP has pumped a lot of money for the production of food, and of course, by doing so, we destroy the land. We lost species of birds, butterflies, and so on. But thinking what the trend is now, including in the European Union, including in the UK, we can see probably a reverse. And some colleagues will argue that, we are responsible, we all are responsible for this, but also because the way the CAP was evolved and how farmers benefited from. So in a way, we gave them money to destroy the environment. Now we need to support them to bring them back. So we will have a responsibility on this. And I think probably people will say, okay, it's a justification, to support farmers, to bring back, our butterflies and our flowers and so on.
So Carmen, the last question I want to put to you this evening, and it's something that you and I have talked about in the past. The future direction for UK agriculture is about regenerative farming, about soil restoration, about animal welfare, you know, about having native breeds. And this is fantastic. But the point is, and if you read George Eustace's introduction to the path to sustainable farming, he very proudly talks about how he's from a 6th generation farm. And we know that farms are passed down through the generations. And as that happens, so is the culture, so is the way of doing things. So this is the way it's always been done. So we're talking about a major shift and change for the agricultural industry. This is not the way they think. And there's also that macho element in it. You know, my tractor is bigger than yours, my herd is bigger than yours. And how are we going to achieve that? I see that as one of the kind of biggest barriers going forward.
Yes, indeed. Maybe we can argue that farmers need to change their mindset and need to think about it, business models which will answer society's expectation. But there will be farmers and farmers. And I also think that farmers are passionate about what they are doing. I know, you know, I'm not here to be the advocate, and you know, most of you knows that actually I'm not. But what I'm trying to say is that there has to be a shift in their way of thinking about the way they think about subsidies. And I know not all farmers want subsidies. Farmers will say, okay, I can farm without, let me do my job. So I think, although there will be a change in the mindset, they will also need to think, to be more innovative. They will need to readapt, to reorient, and to clearly to respond what the market wants and what consumer wants.
Great. Dr. Carmen Hubbard, thank you for a fantastic lecture and a really interesting discussion. If we were live, you'd be hearing lots of applause now. So thank you. That was really fascinating and really interesting.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you to university, and thank you to all of those people who gave up their time to listen to me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to our audience for being here. We're back again next Tuesday, the 11th of May, with another lecture that has a very long title, so I'm going to read it. And it's by Patrice Lawrence, and it's called From All Writers Matter to Zadie Smith via Badgers, a speedy A to Z of being a Black British children's writer in a publishing industry still working on diversity. So we hope we might see some of you there on Tuesday, but for now, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening.